I'm Charles Hauer, and I'm interviewing Dr. David Littrell. Dr. Littrell, today I'd like to ask you a few questions about the fires on the K-State campus, the Nichols fire and the Auditorium fire here.
Yes, I'm very familiar with them because I lived here at that time. I was a student here during one of the fires.
All right. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you remember from the first of the fires?
First one was in January of 1965. I was in high school at the time, but my dad had been a professor here since 1954, so of course I grew up in Manhattan. I had played as a child on the fire escapes. Every child in Manhattan seemed to, although it was illegal to do so because it was dangerous, but that doesn't stop children, of course. They looked like rocket ships. They were on the side of the building, and we couldn't go inside the building to use them, but we would crawl up these slick spirals and go to the top and then slide down and hope that the campus police or maintenance people would not find us. So that was always a thrill for a lot of the kids, and they took those and put them in the city park for a while, and then decided, like everything else, they thought it was too dangerous for children, which it wasn't, but they got rid of them anyway, thanks to government intervention. And so another thing I remember about the auditorium is going to hear several different musical events. When I was in grade school and high school, one of the most memorable ones was when I was in 5th grade, walked down from Lee School to hear the Dallas Symphony play in the old auditorium. And it was a barn. It was called the Barn. The sight lines were terrible. In fact, the audience was half the audience was seated facing each other, looking at the side, and you had to turn your head one way or the other to watch the stage. The auditorium dated to 1904. But so I had a lot of good memories. I heard one of the greatest cellists in the world, Leonard Rose, play a recital there. So I have had a lot of background with that auditorium. Well, anyway, it was a cold January morning, and I was up at the high school and found out that the auditorium had burned down. The concertmaster of the orchestra and another string player burned it down. They set fire to the curtains, and you had oiled floors. Everything was made out of wood, and it just went up like crazy. And there was not much they could do to save it. They lost a lot of grand pianos. Of course, they can always be replaced, but they lost several double basses from the 1930s that were excellent. We have only 2 of them left, and the string tech kids still use them. And the composition teacher here lost all his compositions he'd ever written, burned up, and there are a few other things. The music department office, I think, was in the auditorium and so forth, but we were scattered other places on the campus at that time. Well, that was devastating enough, and they did catch the 2 young men because they talked, and they went and bragged to their friends, and one went to a prison for a while, and the other went to a mental hospital for a while, and they've never repented about doing it, and they're still living. And about the Nichols, the Nichols I remember vividly. I was at a party across the street at the old Ramada Inn, which is now the Holiday Inn. It was on Friday the 13th, December of 1968, and somebody said that there's a fire across the street, so we came outside. It was just frigid. It was something like 10 or 15 degrees out, which is part of the problem, because the fire department got here and they had low water pressure. Didn't have enough water pressure to fight the fire. Things were freezing, of course. They never did find the person. A lot of people said they think they knew who it was, but I don't know. But they set fire to some wooden bleachers that had been stacked at the front door over here. And you had an oiled gymnasium floor, because at one time that was the field house. And then it became the gym, especially women's gym, and down the basement was a swimming pool. You had the radio, KSAC, KKSU over there. You also had a lot of the music department over there too. And so it went up pretty fast. My cello teacher was up there on the 2nd floor, right over here on this end, and he got the key in the door, but he had to turn back. He was with the head of facilities at that time. My teacher had a gas mask on, or whatever it is, and he was able to get in there, but the other one being overcome by smoke, so he had to turn around and take him out, and the firemen would not let him back in, so He and the entire string quartet lost their instruments. My cello teacher lost a 1720 David Techler cello, which is a fantastic instrument. You know, it's not like a Strad, but it's getting up there. 300 years old. Then, of course, he lost his library. That's all the bowings and fingerings, all his parts. You know, it was just devastating. And other faculty members did the same thing. They lost grand pianos, personal libraries. It's just like if the faculty here just all of a sudden all their trombone music burned up. You know, lots of your teachers' notes and things like that, all gone forever. It was a devastating fire. They could do nothing about it because they didn't have enough water pressure and the freezing lines and things like that, because it was a frigid night, terribly bitter cold. So
You were saying a lot of the destruction that happened. Did K-State provide any reimbursement for the teachers at all, or?
they had personal insurance. We always carry personal insurance because the state never carries insurance on stuff. It'd be too expensive. But they just coughed up the money. Of course, in the late 60s is a little bit more flush economically than it is right now. And so they were able to substitute, buy some new things. They got a lot of new string instruments. I don't know so much about the wind and brass, but I'm sure they got a lot of those replaced too. We still use a lot of those instruments today, 40 years later, that were purchased at that time. And then after that, I still had 2.5 years to go at K-State. We were scattered in 7 buildings around the campus, the music department was. We had trailers brought in just on the other side of Nichols, in that little oval. There were about 3 trailers there. I had music theory there and form and analysis. I took my cello lessons in a trailer. And there was a house across the street. We had orchestra and band in the ROTC building, which is completely on the other end of campus, which is a real pain. So I had a cello I just left over there in a locker, and then practiced over on this end of the campus. And we were in East Stadium for quite a while, and it was a lot junkier then than it is now. So we were scattered in, like I said, 7 different buildings around the campus. But we had a very large enrollment. I think it was, close to 200 music majors, somewhere around the same it is right now. There wasn't any auditorium still. It was being built at that time. And so we had all our, like the McCain events nowadays, they had them down at the City Auditorium, which is a gymnasium. And that's where I heard some great performances down there, but it was still a gymnasium. And I think we had an orchestra concert in the chapel, band concerts in the chapel, and things like that.
So when did they finish building this auditorium?
McCain Auditorium, we'll see, the old auditorium never had a name, it was just called the Auditorium. They built the new one over about a 3-year period or something like that. And it opened in 1970. And the opening concert was Van Cliburn, the great pianist. He had won the 1958 Tchaikovsky competition right at the height of the Cold War, which was incredibly important for the United States to beat the Russians, because they had just put up Sputnik in '57, and theirs is '58, and Van Cliburn won that award. So he gave the first recital here in '70, and also the Minnesota Orchestra came down and did a regular concert, and they also did a work that had been commissioned for the opening of the auditorium. And then at that time, the building stopped right over here at this wall. You had the music office, and then you had the choir and the orchestra band rooms, and that wall right here was the outside of the building. So I never did get to see this area when I was an undergraduate, because I left here in '71. But interesting thing on this wall right inside here, next to the planters, if you look very carefully, you'll see some blue paint left over on the outside, because when that was the exterior of the building, someone from KU came over. This is after Nixon had come and given a talk at one of the Landon lectures. And someone had painted KSU, Nixon's favorite high school. Of course, we hated KU just as much as we do now. So they had done that, and of course they had to scrub it off, but you can still see remnants of that paint on the outside wall. And then this music wing was built in '75, so several years after I had left.
Over the time you've been in Manhattan and been the teacher here, have you seen like the fires? Did that affect the enrollment in band or orchestra?
No,
here?
we all
Yeah.
pulled together. We had large enrollment for that time, which is I think 13.5, which is a lot at that time. Because I remember back in the '50s when Mercury had on the front page the K-State beats finally got over 7,500 students. It was a lot smaller back then. Of course, to me, I thought it was large. Didn't know it differently. But no, we had a great morale among the students. We had a good time. Had a good orchestra and had a really good teacher. But this faculty right now is the best faculty I've ever worked with in all my career now. They've had the collegiality, the level of playing and knowledge, and we're very fortunate here.